Hello there, my name's David, and I'm just creating this video for the new children's hospital coming in Cambridge. My son's name is George Radcliffe, and he received a cancer diagnosis at the age of 3. And unfortunately, his battle came to an end in October 2023 when his treatment options ran out, and unfortunately, he passed away. Um, I've been trying to give it some thought about, even though it was 2 years ago, because things were such a blur. I think the trauma of having a son going through that treatment, and also the trauma of experiencing it myself, it can be sometimes tricky to kind of reflect and look back. But certainly now, things still hit me when I'm least expecting it, about whether the day he was diagnosed, or the day we first saw the lump, or the day he started treatment. I mean, I think certainly when we first saw the lump, we didn't think much of it. But one of the things I found most difficult was wanting George to still be a little boy. And I think even now I struggle with the concept of George, the boy that had cancer, George, the boy that didn't have cancer. And of course, George was all of those things and more. And I think certainly at the time, going from appointment to appointment, from surgery to surgery, to going down to live in London when George was having proton beam therapy, to invasive surgery, to having a tracheostomy, for us to his mum and I to learn how to change those trachea tapes. I mean, the list goes on. But I think the almost bombardment and trying to keep your head above water while also trying to be a good dad was really difficult. And I think, some of the obvious things are there, where the day that he had his first treatment and suddenly had wires coming out of his chest, and George didn't really understand it. But I think certainly what helped was, at the time, we always spoke to George. He never felt scared. Maybe he did for very briefly, but as long as his mum and I stayed positive and explained what was happening, we were very lucky that George was an incredibly articulate little boy. So we were able to explain what was happening in ways he understood. He never, fortunately, knew his life was coming to an end, but he understood that there were naughty cells, and the doctors and nurses were there to help him and give him special medicine in order to be able to fight those naughty cells that didn't really understand their job anymore. But yeah, it obviously insanely hard, and yeah, just obviously wish he could he'd still be here. But even now, thinking about the boy he'd be if he'd survived some of those treatments is even something tricky to reconcile. So yeah, I think that's probably it. Reconciling a healthy, happy little boy becoming very ill and passing, and that entire journey was very, very difficult. In the hospital, his mum and I kind of split the jobs. I think we kind of, it sounds sexist saying it, we kind of fell into roles which are kind of more traditional. My wife, when we first got together, was the breadwinner, but now she, when George became ill, very much became his main carer. I mean, we obviously shared so many jobs, but there wasn't really a day that Lisa wasn't in the hospital. Looking at the support that I think we both had, I think the priority was always George in all of those moments. And I kind of wish, looking back, that there were meals given to parents, that it wasn't always a case of having to try and batch cook at home and bring stuff in and try and find the way of heating it up. But I think the most important thing was the staff were there to understand, and the doctors and nurses genuinely listened to me and Lisa. Lisa's George's mummy, in that we said George is articulate. We said that George will understand more than you realise. And actually, when we explained that to doctors and nurses, they were careful not to have some of the perhaps more scarier conversations in front of him. But I think the most important thing for me is understanding from all the health professionals, from day dot what the implications were of this disease and what the treatment options were. And yeah, just I don't know, sitting here wishing the results had been different. But you know, the healthcare professionals at Adam Brooks and then on to UCLH and Great Ormond Street were incredible, even though their workloads are insane. I think throughout the whole process, when I look back and how I coped personally, I had some very close friends. I actually set up a WhatsApp group, and I just called it Stuff. And I put my 5 closest mates in there who don't necessarily know each other all brilliantly, but they know of each other. But I consider them all very close friends. And I just kept saying stuff in there. I kept saying how I was feeling. And that first day, I think I said I cried. I've cried 28 times, and not to make a joke of it, but just to show the reality of it. I heavily got into cooking and almost kind of wanted to create this perfect nest at home where, you know what, George is going to have this awful treatment, but at least I know that mum and son are fed, and you know that helped me. But you know, I guess that always comes back to purpose. And when you're firefighting in those early days of just learning about diagnosis through to treatment, you're always going to be wanting to try and do what you can to try and keep that family unit safe, that little boy still wanting to be a little boy, still wanting to find joy, and go outside and get in nature. And certainly personally for me, there was a moment at UCLH where I think, thanks to Young Lives versus Cancer, which are an amazing charity, they did a 2-week course, which was incredible. I remember this. I was in a really dark place, and I was stuck kind of in Camden in this beautiful flat that UCLH got for us. But I was on my own. Lisa and George were at the hospital. They were very much needing to stay there. We had COVID at some point in there, so we had to isolate. Every morning, George had to have his tracheostomy tapes taken, where he had a trachea put in. And it was mine and Lisa's job to do that after we were signed off, to be able to kind of give that care. And I noticed there were 2 things. I would walk 1.5 miles, 2 miles to UCLH. And then I would walk back to my apartment. I would get on with work after doing George's trachea tapes. He would then go and have his proton beam therapy. I kind of wasn't needed at that point. That was Lisa and George down there. I would then walk back. And I'd felt so dark for such a long time that the walk to the hospital and then the walk back to the accommodation and then walk back to the hospital to then go all around London and have our London adventures, where it might be as simple as going on a red bus or going to a really cool museum. I suddenly realised how much it was helping me. Just that little bit of fresh air. Well, London fresh air, it's a bit of an oxymoron, but you know, get outside, get some fresh air, let the sun hit your face, because there are other coping mechanisms which I lent into, and you know, pouring too many glasses of wine of an evening. But looking back now, I can't regret it. I did the best I could, but if I hadn't drunk that wine in the evening, maybe I'd have been a better dad to George in that moment. But certainly the regular exercise, talking to people, and actually rewarding yourself when you do something small. That's what I learned from kind of this 2-week course that I had with Young Lives versus Cancer. It was ridiculous. I used to always take multivitamins. I exercised all the time, and I hadn't realised I hadn't taken multivitamin. They were like, this course was like, one thing to do today is to set yourself a target and then reward yourself for doing it. And this is going to sound mad, but I was laying on the sofa. I couldn't be bothered to move. I was on my own in this flat. And I got up, I walked across there, and I took a vitamin tablet. And it was the tiniest bit of self-care I'd given myself. And the next morning, I rewarded myself by sitting next to the river and having a cup of coffee. And I'd walk past that river every day, barely even noticed it, barely even noticed the coffee shop. But when I walked downstairs, I thought, you know what, I'm going to reward myself to have a coffee. And it was amazing how much it helped. So, I don't know, tiny little coping mechanisms. And, you know, let's all face it, every health professional or anyone will always say, eat more fruit, eat more veg, do more exercise. And it's true, you know, those healthy eating, healthy living, has helped me a lot feel more positive. And those days where maybe I'm really incredibly sad and you know what, I don't really want to face the office, and I don't really want to face having to talk to humans. And maybe I've had a couple of glasses of wine the night before, and I think, you know what, I can't face anything. Just getting outside and having that walk, or having a chat with a close friend, has been, yeah, that's made all the difference to me, certainly. With regards to professional help, I think I have found it quite easy. You know, the nurses and doctors around, they were able to talk through George's treatment. I think post treatment, we were amazingly supported by East Anglia Children's Hospice, another incredible charity. George passed away at that hospice, and I think a message that I've always really wanted to get out. Hospice isn't just end of life care. For George, when we made the referral, it's because he had a tracheostomy, and it was incredibly hard. You know, this articulate little boy suddenly not being able to speak, but then in the first day managed to push air above it in order to speak. You know, an incredibly proud dad moment. Sorry, going off on a tangent. Anyway, East Anglia Children's Hospice. When the referral came, I was like, why the hell is my son going to a hospice? He's not dying yet at that time anyway. But it became apparent that when we visited there, how magical of a place it was. Now, East Anglia Children's Hospice obviously covers East Anglia, but I'm sure there's children's hospices across the country. If you're a parent whose child has medical needs, like having cancer, or any awful disease with receiving treatment, get in touch with the hospice. They can give you give a space for you to relax, have a cup of tea, maybe they'll make you a hot meal. And for George, it was a replacement for nursery. He missed nursery so much. He loved going to nursery, seeing other children, learning. And that hospice gave us that space. Post George's passing, there's a therapist that I see now kind of once every 5 weeks. She kind of pointed out to me that I was 42 and I hadn't gone to, I mentioned that I hadn't gone to get my 40-year health check. And she kind of observed that I might be kind of slipping into a bit of depression, which I was like, yeah, of course I am. My kid's dead. That's obvious. But she kind of paused and explained the difference between grief and depression, and what that can sometimes lead to. And actually, and this is really recent, I went and visited my doctor to talk about mental health. And the space he gave me and the advice he gave me, it was incredible. I don't think I was at the stage where I would have done anything drastic or stupid with the way I was feeling. But yeah, he made a couple of little suggestions for keystone habit changes, and they've been amazing. So as daunting as it might feel about going to a doctor or speaking to a healthcare professional about mental health, or maybe just how you're feeling in that moment, do it, because it's incredibly helpful. So I mean, I must admit, I like to talk. This video probably shouldn't even be 13 minutes long, and I don't think I finished talking yet. So hopefully someone edits it down. But I mean, the kind of formal settings for healthcare professionals, if whether it's during your child's treatment, or perhaps they haven't managed to make it through their treatment, or maybe they have made it through their treatment and you're suddenly faced with other health issues because of that treatment. I think, talking to friends and family, talking to professionals that, maybe just an old conversation. I remember sitting the other day chatting to someone at the gym, and it turned out his grandson's just been diagnosed with leukemia. And we just got chatting, and I don't think he wouldn't have opened up to me, and I just mentioned that we're raising money for children's cancer. And suddenly we had this conversation, and hopefully I managed to signpost him in a couple of areas with Young Lives versus Cancer on a couple of websites out there, which were really helpful. So, but don't necessarily Google everything. That can also be bloody terrifying. Looking at the new children's hospital, I think when I saw Great Ormond Street and the help that when George was receiving treatment there, and they offered me and Lisa, a therapist each, and it was such an amazing platform where I was able to talk about my concerns, worries, just anything. They were dedicated to me as a healthcare professional, but it was a children's hospital. I was blown away by that, and I genuinely think at times it allowed me to be a better father to my son when um, all George wanted to be was the wonderful boy that he was. He didn't ask for the cancer, but he had it. And the boy that he was now was an amazing little boy with cancer. But if, the new children's hospital at Addenbrooke's, if they're able to, if there are funds for it, to be able to say, you know what, these parents need some one-to-one therapy whilst their child is in hospital and receiving this treatment, then that would be incredible. Maybe cheekily also some really good play areas, because there's nothing worse than my son sitting next to the windowsill when he's having to isolate because of a blood test that said his neutrophils are too low. Making sure the play equipment's right. But I just know it's going to be an incredibly magical place, and I can't wait till it's built, because if it gives an area for families to be families whilst they're going through the most horrible experience any parent should have to go through, any child should have to go through for that matter. Hopefully that'll be something good. So I think that's me. Hopefully I haven't waffled a bit too much. And just obviously all the best of luck with whatever you're facing at the moment.